Supply Chain Leader Succession Survey Results. My name is Dennis Orthman. I'm a Senior Director with SMI, and I'm pleased to be the host and a participant for today's webinar session. Today we've got lots of folks connecting to our webinar from across the country, and SMI is thankful to you all that you could find the time to be a part of this. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees for today's session are in listen-only mode in order to eliminate any background noises and to ensure audio clarity. The voices that you will hear today are my own voice and the voice of our presenter, Jamie Kowalski. Although everyone is in listen-only mode, we are interested in your questions. The webinar technology does allow for attendees to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel. You are all encouraged to submit questions at any time during today's session. When we finish the presentation, I'll then read the submitted questions and Jamie will try his best to answer them. Today's session will be approximately 1 hour in total, depending upon the number of questions. The slides that you see today are the intellectual property of Mr. Kowalski and will not be distributed. Lastly, I want all attendees to understand that you will receive an email today as a follow-up to the webinar, and that email contains a survey request from SMI. I'd like to encourage you to complete the survey as your feedback is important as we try to continue to improve our webinar program. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter, Jamie Kowalski, the Chief Executive Officer of Jamie Kowalski Consulting, LLC. Since 1972, Jamie has developed and utilized his specialization in healthcare and hospital supply chain management in a variety of roles. Jamie has been an executive, an entrepreneur, strategic advisor, thought leader, coach, mentor, consultant, and advocate. Jamie previously served as Vice President of Business Development for Owens & Minor, and he held a similar position as Vice President of Strategy and Development for McKesson Provider Technologies, a business unit of the Fortune 100 company McKesson Corporation. Prior to that, Jamie founded the firm Kowalski Dickow Associates. He's been internationally recognized in that firm, leading hospital supply chain management consulting practices. He's served well over 1,500 clients. Jamie's background also includes time as a Director of Supply Chain Management and an Assistant Vice President for Support Services at 4 community and tertiary hospitals. Lastly, Jamie is the co-founder and board chairman of the Bellwether League, the not-for-profit Hall of Fame for healthcare supply chain executives. Jamie's been conducting surveys of supply chain executives for a number of years now, and we are pleased to have him share the results of his 2015 survey that focused on leadership and succession. Welcome, Jamie. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the nice introduction, and I guess everybody has a pretty good indication, for those who don't know me, that I've been around a while. And with that time frame, I've had the opportunity to observe a lot, and I have done these types of surveys for many years, actually going back to the early 1980s, believe it or not. I want to thank SMI for facilitating this webinar and its members and those who helped the seminar, or rather the webinar, come to be because you completed one of the surveys. So I do thank you for that. And actually, you might want to know that Tony Trupiano of Wellstar was the one who won the Fitbit in the raffle. For those who completed the survey, we drew his name out, and he has received his Fitbit, and hopefully he's staying very healthy as a result of that. Now, I also thank you also for taking your time today so we can share the findings with you. I know everybody's really busy with all kinds of things going on. Note that I am not a provider, or at least I haven't been for quite some time. I work with a lot of providers and talk to a lot of providers. So I may have a different view or interpretation of the survey responses, the data, if you will. But you should develop your own. I'm here just to sort of wet your whistle with what the data is, but I'm also going to try to not make this a data dump. I'm going to try to share with you what I believe the data tells us, and then we can discuss that with some of the questions you might have, etc., as we go along, or at the end, excuse me. So, survey information, note that, as I said, it's been conducted for a long time and annually for the last many years. and it's really to help facilitate discussion of some of the issues that we face as supply chain leaders in the healthcare provider sector particularly, and also to educate the C-suite about some of the issues and the impacts associated with those. The people who contributed to this survey and this actual webinar, I guess, at the same time, would include myself and the Bellwether League, specifically Mary Starr, who is the treasurer of the Bellwether League at this point. But we also want to make sure that we recognize the sponsors. They were the ones who also made this happen. And I want to first mention Amerinet, who is the presenting sponsor, and as most of you know, Amerinet is going through some significant changes now. But I wanted to recognize them as an organization that has continually sponsored some of the surveys that I've done over the years. The other two sponsors are Novus Informatics. They are not a well-known company, but they do have data cleansing, item master management, and spend management technology solutions for healthcare. If you haven't heard of them, you might want to check them out. Same thing with DataTrans. It's a premier e-commerce technology that came from other industries and has been in healthcare now for a few years, working with a number of providers and their suppliers. Why are we doing this survey? Why did we choose this topic? Well, it's actually a couple of years late. I had an assignment to interview personally, at least on the phone, 57 senior supply chain leaders about 2 years ago, talking about a variety of issues. Almost to a person, these supply chain leaders expressed one of their concerns was the lack of an adequate pool of qualified candidates to fill what they saw as vacancies that were going to occur fairly soon. And when you go to the conferences and you look around the room, there's a lot of gray hairs and no hairs. I am a no hairs and a gray hair, so no offense intended. They admit to not having done enough to prepare for that eventuality, thus the reason for the survey. And by the way, if there's any solace in this remark or this piece of data, CEOs particularly, have not done this very well either. They have an average turnover these days, according to surveys done by the American College of Healthcare Executives, Modern Healthcare, et cetera, and articles that have been published about this. Their turnover is every 4 to 5 years, and they are poorly managing succession and leadership development, according to this other information. So whether that puts us in a good place, relatively a good place, or a bad place along with other bad actors, I don't know. You'll have to make that call. We had 175 responses, which is 58% of those invited. And of those responses, 73%, or excuse me, 73 surveys, which is 41%, were complete. Now, complete means all questions were answered. So if one question was left unanswered, it wasn't a completed survey. And I learned that from Marquette University, who has helped me over the years with other versions of the annual survey that I've been doing. And they're pretty fussy about it being a educational and research institution. College of Business and the university say, no, if it's not a completed survey with all questions answered, it is not a complete survey, thus the category. So, but we still were able to get some pretty good data because the 105 and the 73 responses represent a pretty good portion of the major IDNs that are out there and members of SMI. So let's talk a little bit about the respondents. This is a profile of, because we wanted to get a baseline of what it is you, the responders, are all about. And since this is the SMI group, if you'll notice on the far left of the chart, SMI, 100% of you are members of that organization. Many of you are members, 2/3 of you, of HRMM, about half of that ACHE, 2/3 of that is HFMA, and then others going down the line. But the vast majority, other than SMI membership, belong to those organizations as shown. Now, your current position, 76% of you are a VP or an SVP, senior VP, of an IDN. And if you look at the, I'm sorry, this is the all respondents. So if you look at that, you'll see 46% vice president, 16% senior vice president and an IDN. And then if you look at SMI, you actually have a higher percentage of vice president and senior vice presidents at an IDN level. That just tells you who the heck you are and what role you have within your organization, and therefore maybe a little bit of your perspective regarding the rest of these answers. Okay? The size of your IDNs vary, and that's a good thing. We have, the vast majority or the largest portion is represented by IDNs in the 6 to 20 range, with the smallest portion being more than 20. And if you look at the pie charts between all of the respondents, the lower left pie, and the SMI respondents inside the square with the SMI color or close to it, you can see that they aren't that far off as far as how that distribution is laid out. So we've got a good representation, we think, of the various types and sizes of those organizations. Now, we're starting to get into some pretty important specifics, at least relative to succession planning. How long have you been in a position that is the highest level supply chain leader in your career? And if you look at this this bar chart, a couple of things strike us. 11% of the SMI members, excuse me, have been in this position for 5 years or less. If you'll notice, there's really no blue bar chart on top of that, so it says that the earliest, rather the shortest career in the all category was 5 years or more, and then we break it down into the other categories. I think that this is just interesting to note that, to me, SMI members seem to have been in their highest level supply chain leader position for the shortest period of time, or at least a larger portion of them, but still a small portion of the total. And I think it's also important to note that that's probably a good thing, because it probably means there's some new blood going on, or it may still represent a musical chair scenario where people are just moving between organizations as far as their employment is concerned. So that's the total picture in the highest level supply chain leader position, which is what we were looking for. Now, get into a couple of what ifs. If it is your choice, how many more years do you intend to work for your current employer? I think it's interesting, number one, that the numbers are very similar between SMI, again, the greenish or turquoise part of the bar chart on the bottom, and the all category, which is all the others up above in the blue. Says to me that 64% will leave their current position in somewhere around 6 years when you add them all up. 31% will leave in less than 6 years. I think that's an important element to be looking at, because we're trying to determine how intense is this issue relative to a time frame. So we took blocks of time. We could have picked other blocks. We could have picked 1 to 5 years. We decided that this was a good way to segment that timeline relative to the event, so to speak, of a vacancy coming up. So that's if it's your choice. Now, also, if it's your choice, how long do you intend to be in any career? And this tells us something as well. It tells us to some degree when people are intending to retire or become self-employed or open a hardware store or something else. This is something other than being a supply chain leader in healthcare. So if you look at these bars, I think what it says to me is that 47% intend to retire in about 6 years. That's a big chunk of the profession, at least represented by those who completed this survey. In terms of the SMI numbers, You look at 23% with 6 years or less. So you add those all together, and it's a substantial piece, and which leads me to conclude that this is an important issue. We're going to lose a lot of players that are out there right now. So then we ask the question, how would you describe this situation? Is it something that is of concern? Is it not concerning? And then we tried to break it down, and again, semantics may come into play here, but we chose the categories of, well, it's meaningful, to it's serious, to it's severe, to it's critical. And if you'll notice, 63 to 67% stated that it is at least meaningful all the way through critical. 2/3 of the respondents said this is a serious issue. We best do something about it. So we have that sort of validation that while these numbers may not be exactly the same as I obtained in the interviews a couple of years ago, they're still serious about this issue and concerned about it. So how concerned are they? Well, again, a little different way of looking at a similar, or if not the same question. In the SMI responders case, 48% said, yes, we're concerned. The mentored person that I'm working with is not ready. Or 24%, same number, said, I don't even know of any candidates, so I'm not even mentoring anybody. Now, interestingly enough, 49% of the SMI responders said, no, I'm not so worried because my organization will find someone. In other words, it seems to me that that is saying, I'm leaving that to my organization. I'm not going to concern myself. I'm not concerned now because my organization will deal with that. And then the far right bar, at least in the all category, the all other category, tells me something that I didn't expect nor want to see, and that is that 11% said, no, I'm not concerned because it's not my concern. That troubles me only because as a professional in the supply chain industry, I'd like to think that we all share a certain sense of responsibility associated with making sure that we have professionals in this profession that can take over for any of us, whether we retire, whether we pass on, whether we go do something else with our lives, whatever it might be. I'd like to think that we would all be in sync, but a double-digit number, low as it may be in double digits, said it's not even my concern. That bothers me. I don't know if it bothers you. In all other ways, the all others match up pretty well with the SMI responses, with the exception that only 3% of the SMI responders said, this isn't my concern. So I think that's kind of good, for SMI anyway. Now, next question. Is your boss aware of this departure intention or timeline? 70% said yes for the SMI group. 65% said yes for the all group. I have to ask myself and then rhetorically ask you the question, since we can't have a discussion, is, do you believe this? Is this really the case that many, that high a proportion of people have made their boss aware of their intentions or their timeline? I admit I'm skeptical. People that I talk to on a regular basis tell me, no, I haven't discussed that. I might have my own timeline, but I haven't told my boss yet. So I'm a little concerned about how that was answered. Now, these were blinded surveys. I do not know, who filled them out or who answered what. So it's not that they have to hide their response or not tell the truth, if you will, but this bothers me because it's a little high. And then it says, have you developed a supply chain leader succession plan with your boss? And we see, again, some pretty high numbers, 73% for the SMI responders, 61% for the all other responders. Again, do you believe this is believable? I'm having trouble with it. The portion that may have a plan, have they really shared that with their boss? Are they not concerned that the boss is going to say, gee, I better start looking, and if I find somebody sooner rather than later, maybe I'll make a move? I hope that's not the case. Now, for those of you who don't have a succession plan and said, no, I don't have it, why not? So this bar chart shows the answers that we provided, and then the next slide is going to show us their random written comments. So for the SMI group, again in the turquoise color, don't know how, 11%. That's great that they would admit that. You don't know how, you don't know how. You haven't done one before? Hey, you haven't done one before. Nobody said from SMI, don't think it's my job. A third of you said, gee, I never thought about it. And then the rest of you said things other than that. And if you'll notice, the said pretty much, 95%, there's an other category. And here are some of the answers that came out in the other category. Now, I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll jump to a couple of them, particularly those in red font. A remark such as, well, I have one in mind. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is, and I've observed over the years, is that if you have one in mind, that may be good for you, but it's not good for anybody else. If you're not communicating it, if it's not in writing, even if it's a draft, even if you don't sign it, it's still better to have something written down that you can communicate to others. It's too early to start, or it's not been a top priority, but planning is starting now. It's a moot point. I'm not sure I understand that. That's why I put a gazillion question marks after that one. I have no one that's qualified for me to mentor. Well, that's an issue in and of itself, and we'll talk about that more toward the end. None of my direct reports can replace me. Now, is that a fact? Is that a sort of a quantitative as well as a qualitative evaluation? Or may I dare say, is that a little ego showing that says, hey, no one can replace me? Depends on how you read it. And again, I'm just suggesting what those conclusions might be. You need to draw your own. One I have the red question mark in next is, it's not a priority with my boss. Okay, but shouldn't it be a priority for the supply chain leader? And then the last one in red being, I'm unsure of the executive's preference, senior executive's preference. Most instances, a national search takes place. Okay, that's a fact, but that's not an explanation of why or why not in this case. All right, so draw your own conclusions about that. Next, if or when you announce your voluntary departure or retirement, what will you be able to do? Will you be able to handpick or select your replacement, recommend that person, participate in that process, or none of the above? And most of you said we could at least recommend the replacement. So somehow you're going to be involved in the process. Now that could be a good thing, and it could be maybe less than productive thing too, if you think about it. Maybe it should be somebody who's totally unbiased and should have the ability to make the decision about it without your recommendation. Now, I'm going to get into why that may or may not be the case in just a couple minutes. Here's a couple other things about you in your situation. Are you now, or have you been, a member of the C-suite? That is a common topic. It has been in many of my previous surveys over the years and conversations with people across the board. Interestingly enough, these are almost identical pie charts. So between SMI and all, they're virtually the same answers. Yes, about 40% of the time. No, never been or are now a member of the C-suite. Okay, so for those of you who have, about how many years have you spent as an official member of the C-suite? And you can see we have some blocks of time here where it's up to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, and more than 10 years. So if you notice, the largest percentage is 5 years or less. So it's a fairly new scenario. And more than 10 years is in the mid-teens for both groups. And that seems like that would make sense. Of those that I see or talk to on a regular basis, this seems to make sense. I would have expected a pie chart looking something like this. So this is just telling us how long have you been a member in that fabled part of the organization. Now, again, also, this is about you. Would you extend your work, either in your career or with your current employer, if you were elevated to the C-suite? Now, this applies to 60% of you. And interestingly enough, 60% and almost 60% in the all group said, yes, I would. So does that mean that because there's no immediate opportunity for advancement into the C-suite that you're leaving, that you're ending your career? I don't know if that's a fair direct cause and effect relationship, but at least it raised that question in my mind as I looked at this data the first time, the second, the fifth, the 10th time. So I just raised that question. Is there a relationship? But I do not know the answer, and we did not structure the survey to actually try to get at that answer. I think that would be a good one for a follow-up. Maybe we'll do another survey in a year or two to see what that answer might be per those who fill out the survey. So then we asked about education. What is your level of education right now? And you'll notice almost 75% of both groups have a graduate degree or better. Interestingly enough, the SMI group has a no degree with 3% of the responders, and the entire group, or the rest of the group, excuse me, has a 4%. So it's a small percentage, yet they exist. And then the rest of that comes out to be bachelor's degree and or beyond a bachelor's degree, beyond a master's degree, I should say, excuse me. So we have a good portion of those with formal educations, and I will share this observation with you. My experience is healthcare, at least in the provider sector, not so much in the supplier or the GPO sector or whatever, but in the provider sector, there seems to be a focus on academic credentials. And if you want to be considered a member of the C-suite, if you want to be considered a senior executive, the master's degree preparation is pretty much expected. I mean, you see the other leaders, the leaders in the nursing group, or certainly physicians with multiple degrees, maybe PhDs and MDs. So to be part of that fraternity or sorority, I think we're now looking at the graduate degree being an absolute essential. That's just my observation of that particular aspect of supply chain leaders today and who you say you are. Then we drill down a little bit into what your field or your major degree was in. And this is the all category. You'll notice quite a number of varied career paths that people have taken, in education anyway. And you'll see that there are clinical people, there are engineering people, there's math and social science, quite a bit, but the vast majority, or assuming not the vast majority, the largest portion is business degrees as their major, 42%. And if you look at the SMI pie, it's less variety, but about the same percentage come with a business background. Now, you could argue that management, the green slice with 6%, maybe could be combined, and we could, so that's fine if you want to do that. But it's an interesting factor to see how that breaks down. So we have some in pharmacy, we still have some in social sciences, and then a bunch in others. Now, again, others beyond the others that were listed in the previous pie chart, I can't even imagine what those would be. So it's something that we haven't defined, and I'm not so sure it's that important. Now, let's talk a little bit about the successors, those who are going to come from someplace, have some qualifications, and replace those that are retiring, resigning, maybe their positions being eliminated, which is happening quite a bit, unfortunately, as well. So here's what you said about successors. Number one, is there an adequate number of people in the healthcare industry with the skills, knowledge, and experience to fill the position you hold today? The answer is, again, almost identical between the SMI group and the all other, 55%, 51%. It's pretty darn close. The I don't know and the no's make up the rest of that group. So again, you can draw your own conclusions about this. again, I think it's stating that at this point in time, I believe that there either are or are not, or I'm not sure, that there are people that have the skills, not can get the skills or develop the skills, knowledge, and experience, that have them as we speak. And I want you to know that the yes numbers do contradict the interviews that I conducted 2 years ago. This is a much higher number than I would have expected, but again, 2 years have passed. So things could be changing, things could be improving, and the outlook, so to speak, could be improving from those senior executives, senior supply chain executives that participated in this survey. Similar question coming up. Is there an adequate number of people at your employer that have the skills, knowledge, and experience to fill your position? Now, again, there's the two pie charts. These are notably different. The SMI responders say yes at about a 45% rate, and the rest of them say yes at a 35% rate. And the rest don't know, or no is the answer. And in the case of the SMI people, it was yes or no. It was not I don't know. So it's interesting to note whether or not you believe that, you know, with current people at your employer, are there some with the skills, knowledge, and experience? We're going to talk about or define those skills, knowledge, and experience coming up in just a couple of minutes, a couple more slides. So that's at your employer. All right. Now, is there someone who now works for your employer that with mentoring, grooming, could be prepared to take your position? Now remember, when people said they were going to be leaving, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 6 years, virtually half. All right? Now, mentoring and grooming, yes. The SMI team, 79% of you. Yes, the rest, 66% of you. So that of them, that's obviously a significant gap. And then the rest, again, no and I don't know. So if there's somebody within your organization that could be mentored and groomed, you're saying yes for the most part. And that's a positive thing, because that maybe means that that's the way you can and should be going. All right? So that's how I interpret that number. What part of your employer organization does that person currently work in? Well, you'll notice very quickly the bottom one, supply chain, 50% for SMI, 35% for the others, and that's a big piece. The administration bar, which is small for both SMI responders as well as others, I want you to know it also includes the likes of from finance and IT, et cetera. That's under the broad umbrella of administration, and the other was an undefined, I believe, in the survey itself. So you'll note that there's no clinical unless they're in the other. So some folks for a while have been talking about, well, we need a clinician to run supply chain management. And I'm not disagreeing with that thinking. I'm just saying there's the evidence currently, at least relative to this survey, doesn't state that that's the current thinking. Maybe it was a few years ago. Maybe there's other models that have evolved since in that period of time, rather since they were covering that in a lot of articles and presentations. So we don't see it right now as of this survey being completed. Next slide. I hope you're not dizzy from the rate at which I'm getting through all this data. And you don't have to worry, because we're going to wrap it up with the key messages, and don't worry about the numbers themselves, but what the story is in the slide. How many years might it take for that person to be ready to take over your position? Okay, SMI team or group said 1 to 3 years, a little more than a third of you. Half of that say 4 to 6 years. And not too different numbers from the all others, but I think the interesting thing there is, okay, 1 to 3 years, 36%. Remember, the time period that is in place right now. If we start the clock today, at the time we started this webinar, people are going to retire in 3 to 6 years. My question is, does this data tell us whether or not we're going to be ready? The persons, whomever they are, wherever they're coming from, in-house, outside, whatever, are we going to be ready for that? So remember this data element, we're going to come back to it. Or remember this message, we're going to come back to this one as well, really more in the wrap-up. Okay, what professional or career position or background should your, or must your replacement have? Well, as you would expect, sounds like a slam dunk, why bother ask question, but 99 and 97% said supply chain. The next group that we gave them to choose from is finance, then other, however that was defined. We did not offer definitions of other. Senior administration, look at that, 40 and 42, or 39 and 42%. And I'll make an editorial comment here. I'm seeing more people, particularly in IDNs, who are in the senior administrative team now, taking over supply chain, and there's an explanation for that coming up. And these are your answers, not mine. I have a certain take on it, as I've suggested already. I wonder if you're going to agree. So note that the biggest one is supply chain, followed by finance. In those categories, we identified. Again, low number in nursing, relatively low number in pharmacy. So at least you don't think it's heading in that direction, or should head in that direction. Then, because we asked you, what is your level of education, what education should your replacement have? And it's almost identical in terms of graduate degree, a little higher than the current responders for the SMI group, and just a tad higher in the other group. But also notice that the SMI group says no bachelor's or BA, maybe there's a different bachelor's degree that isn't a BS or BA, and I didn't include that, such as BSIE of industrial engineering, or ME, mechanical engineering, or others. And that is the same number, by the way, of the, or percentage of the, I think it is, of the number of people that said, I don't have a degree now. Maybe they're saying, I don't have it, I'm getting it done. Maybe they really don't have to have a degree, or certainly a higher level degree. So you draw your own conclusions on that one as well, but I found that to be interesting. I just wanted to point out that that's a very similar answer. I believe it's identical. Okay, that's education. Let's talk about certification. Is any certification required for those qualified candidates? Large percentage, 82% of SMI's responders said no. 68% of the all others said no. So that tells me that certification isn't a big issue, isn't a big game changer, or one that will maybe even put a candidate over the top. However, there are certifications that are out there and are available. We asked the question, if you believe that yes is the right answer relative to needing a certification, please note that SMI shows, the SMI group, shows HRMM and its certification 50% of the time, and the all respondents group shows it 61% of the time. Now I want to point something out to you. This is not, well, it is recorded in the previous surveys that I've done of the CEOs and CFOs, okay? People that supply chain leaders might report to in many, many organizations, probably most of them. Their survey responses consistently stated that, unfortunately, for HRMM, they do not recognize the value of AHRMM and or their certification program. So whether that's still important to supply chain leaders, that has to be determined. And here you're saying no, and certainly if you're for those who say yes, if it's AHRMM, note that the senior executives that you are most likely to report to and maybe are the most influential in your organization say, we don't even recognize the value of AHRMM or its certification. That's an FYI. It's another angle on this particular aspect. I am not by any means denigrating AHRMM or its certification program. I'm a fellow in AHRMM myself, and I've been a member since the 70s. So I've been supportive of that organization for a long, long time. But it is interesting to point out this issue and how your organization, particularly SMI, is saying we don't even need any certification. Okay, now here's where we talk about who has the capabilities, the overall capabilities, and it's going to be broken down into 3 types. The first one is skills. What skills must that top supply chain leader have to be successful? The first one is a very interesting chart, and rather than make yourself dizzy by trying to read all of them while they're on the screen, let me just tell you what it says. The number 1 skill that you said is important for a supply chain leader to have to be successful is strategic planning. Now, please note that in my previous surveys, never more than 40% of the supply chain leaders have stated that they have a strategic plan for supply chain management. That's an interesting, I think, contradiction. This is the most important skill, yet only 40%, and this goes back 10 plus years and is as current as 2014. 40% or less actually have a supply chain strategic plan written, maybe in their head, but as I said earlier, if it's in your head, how do the other people on your team, other people in the organization know what that means? Number 2, and a distant second, down to 67%, is supply chain technology. And with all that's exploding in the supply chain technology arena and what it can do for an organization, that makes a lot of sense as to that priority. Number 3 and 4 would be, well, I'll stop at number 3, value analysis. Okay? Now, if you look at that, the first 2, and I might even argue value analysis, which is really an enterprise type of initiative. It's not just a supply chain skill. We're at the top 3. We finished the top 3. We still haven't had a specific supply chain, I'll say tactical or transactional skill that has been mentioned yet. The first one comes up at number 4 with contracting, and it's half of what strategic planning is. Think about that. We've gotten down the line before we get to a skill that would be specifically associated with supply chain management. I find that kind of fascinating. There might be many reasons. So maybe the supply chain skills per se are less important for whatever reason. And one of those reasons might be, well, I delegate that to other members of my team. I'm the senior executive. I need to be strategic. I totally agree with that. Excuse me. Now, we're going to go to the next one, next category, and that is the general skills that are most important to be a top supply chain leader. And again, you'll see this pop out. 90% and 90% plus for SMI's group say it's leadership and management skills, not supply chain technical skills. Okay? So that's telling us that those supply chain leaders, in the view of the people who completed this survey, they believe that you need to be a leader and a really strong manager before you need to be a supply chain technician. And that makes sense. Again, as these organizations have gotten larger and the IDNs have gotten larger and more complex, you certainly need leadership and management skills, maybe even before the technical skills, because you're probably going to have a team that can carry some of the technical skills that you might not even have yet. The ones of you who are on this call or the ones that filled out the survey. Now, okay, if leadership is important, what leadership skills are most important? Well, again, strategic planning, number 1, by a significant number. Number 2, actually, according to SMI, and somehow or other it got moved over to this 3rd slot on the bar chart. I apologize for that error, is visioning. That's a strategic planning that's related to strategic planning. You have to be looking out at the future and envision what it is you might be, could be, should be sometime out in the future, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that might be. And then in between those two is change management. all very important. So if you look at it, the others are less important, but they are still important enough to have garnered a few votes or a few responses. But think about that. The leadership skills that we're talking about include at the top those three, followed by these others, and those are all important. But when you were forced to rank them, this is what you came up with. Now, lastly, what leadership characteristics? Okay, we've got skills. Now we have characteristics, and those are different. And I don't want to play armchair psychologist or psychiatrist, or even social psychiatrist or psychologist, excuse me. But we put out these characteristics and asked you to rank them. And you said, I feel like Steve Harvey on that show, whatever that is. You said, survey said, whatever, you've got the big picture view. You have to have that as a leader. And yes, is there skill associated with having that and what to do with that characteristic? Yes, there are. But you at least have to have the type of personality, so to speak, or characteristic that says, I can look at the big picture and put things in perspective. You have to be results-oriented. While you voted that, or rather voted, while your responses indicated only 42%, the rest of the respondents put it up as high as 87, the number 2 slide. I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't know, because while it may be implied that someone in your position be results-oriented, there are people that hold your position that are out there right now that are not so results-oriented. They're more process-oriented. And while process is important, given the Accountable Care Act, the economy, all the competition, the merging that's taking place, well, I don't know how you cannot be results-oriented and have that as one of your top leadership characteristics. Then ethics and integrity, problem solving, etc. Go on down the line. Now,
hey, Jamie, this is, I'm sorry, Jamie, this is Dennis Orth, and I just want to remind you, we got about 15 minutes left.
Yep, I got you. I'm doing timing as well. Thank you, though.
Great.
I appreciate it. All right. So the number 2 ranked, or excuse me, the number 3 ranked characteristic by the SMI group was discipline at 82% and tied with empathy. And empathy is important too, because one of the things you hear over and over and over again is, well, if you were a nurse, or if you were that patient, or if you were that surgeon, And there are supply chain leaders who believe that if they do their tactical and technical job well, they don't have to have an understanding and an empathy for the end customer. You don't believe that that's true. The people in your group that filled out this survey. Unfortunately, the rest of the group does not agree with you, and there's a big difference there. And the same thing with discipline. So it's an interesting comparative. I think your group, personal opinion, is on the right track with rating those as high as you did. Okay. Do you believe the senior team will agree with the requirements that you selected? 97% of both groups, it's a tie, said yes. We do believe that, and such a tiny portion says no. And I have to ask the question, why are you so sure about that? If they didn't say, well, you get to handpick your successor, which they didn't, and only a little over a third said you'll participate in that process, what is it that would make you so sure that they would agree with you and the skills, the characteristics, etc., that you've identified that they're going to follow and agree with? I don't understand that, and so I don't know the answer to that question. But I want to tee that up with you and say, geez, what is that, or why is that? And then we asked, okay, what is the likelihood that your employer will find your replacement with those skills, traits, characteristics, etc.? And it was reasonably positive from both groups. 58%, I'm sorry, more than reasonably. If you take the 58% that it said very likely to the 21% that said certainly, that's 79% are very positive about that. And again, I'm not so sure because it's not what I heard in the interviews 2 years ago. And there are other answers in this survey that would tend to disagree with the degree of certainty explained here or expressed here. So I'm getting some mixed messages, I guess, as I see them relative to this. So think about that, and maybe we can answer that at some point in a discussion if we don't have time by the end of this session. Okay, getting down to the bottom line here. What's the solution? Is there a solution? Who has to be part of the solution? I don't pretend to have the entire solution, but I think based on your responses, we might have some of the foundation principles to proceed with getting a solution. What resource might help your senior executives recognize the importance of this position and the requirements that you identified? And you all said, and I agree with you, seize from other organizations that understand supply chain management. You said it. Is your number one. Number two is the group purchasing organizations. However, as they are changing, that may or may not be the case down the road. And interesting, you stated HRMM. You didn't know that the Cs were not very high on the position that they would place HRMM as an organization, and certainly their certification program. So just keep that in mind when you think about HRMM maybe being a source. Maybe they will evolve to a point where they will be recognized as a good source, resource, etc. We asked you which is the best source to lead the development, the execution, the coordinating of some sort of comprehensive solution. And interestingly enough, the vast majority of the SMI group said SMI. Now, the next one is universities that offer supply chain management degrees. Now, remember, they're providing it from an academic view, but that's important because we talked about skills that they can teach, whether it's at the undergraduate or the graduate level. And many of those include management and leadership skills. So that makes sense that maybe those two get together. HRMM was rated lower, and each provider organization handling it themselves, not a good idea. Not bad, according to your answers, but not a great idea as being the best source to lead this whole initiative to find a solution as well as execute. And what sources can provide supply chain management knowledge and skills a developing supply chain leader needs? The highest responses you can imagine, universities. Secondly, SMI. And third is, hang on here. I'm sorry, your response was SMI being the highest, university second. And your third was an organization like the Council of Supply Chain Management. And I apologize for the typo there. Should be CSM. Okay, so that's some of your thinking about where can these candidates go to get prepared. You can't do everything through mentoring. They need some of the foundation capabilities, and maybe these organizations can help with that. Okay, here's a sort of a tricky question, or a sensitive one. Do you believe that outsourcing your position is one potential direction that your organization will choose? And the vast majority said no, no, and HELL no. So a pretty high percentage. Again, not so certain why that's the case. I'm not so certain. Is this a philosophical issue that says we don't outsource anything? That may change as pressure on the bottom line changes over time, or if we don't address this internal and external development and leadership succession process, that may be where they have to go. Think about that. Put yourself in your organization's senior executive level shoes or position, and what would your answer be? Would it be different? Which is the most likely source your organization would choose if you had answered yes, that outsourcing is one option? And the majority of the SI group outsourced management. Secondly, and tied for second, is group purchasing organization. Again, we talked about the changes they're going through. Maybe that will or not become greater or lesser. the corporate office of your IDN, will they have people that can go to your organization, your part of that IDN, and take charge, take that leadership position? A number of you said yes, that's the case. All right. Now, we're going to have time for just a couple of questions here, but let me just quickly go through these conclusions. First of all, I don't know if I'm surprised or not that the SMI and the all other responses are as similar as they are in so many of the questions. This is a serious issue. If you add up meaningful through serious and critical, 96% of you are in that thinking. The caution here is that you've got a retirement rate that's coming up at this level, 17% retiring in 3 years or less, 47% retiring in 6 years or less. And you stated that successors need up to 3 years of prep time to be prepared to take over. Those timelines might clash, and that's a serious issue. It's big risk to the industry, our profession. I believe it is to the industry as a whole. These positions are critical, and the person who goes into these positions has to be fully prepared in order to take over. So there's no backsliding, and hopefully there's even progress forward. And the other risk is, the organization itself, with supply chain representing such a huge portion of the budget and the margin, or at least the ability to affect the margin, everybody just needs to be ready to go day one and go forward at a high rate of speed. Okay. Now, what is the call to action? Here, I'm going to make a suggestion. For you, are the provider supply chain leaders, if you have less than 5 years left as you have defined it yourself, maybe you haven't shared that, develop a plan. And develop that plan with your boss. Okay, you have to do that. You got to be honest with them, share that, and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to be leaving in this timeline. Here's what I think we ought to do, or let's put that together. Not sure how to proceed? Well, there are webinars and books and everything else. And interestingly enough, I got an email last week that says there's going to be a talent management webinar put on by the Health Forum. They usually have pretty good programs. I believe Dennis has the link to that information, and you could check that out. I would also be mentoring. If you're not now, start. Find candidates, maybe even a few of them. So if one doesn't work out, maybe number 3 or number 4 or number 2 will work out, and step up and be the one that can take over when you're ready to go. Network. Find those candidates other places in the industry, with suppliers, with GPOs, in the corporate office. That's within your organization, but maybe that's where you ought to be looking and dealing with, finding those candidates. And don't limit it to those with just hospital experience. Think about other industries. We have a number of people from other industries that have come in to take supply chain leader positions here in the hospital sector, and they're doing a pretty darn good job. Not everyone probably, but overall what we're hearing is that they're doing a pretty good job. So the questions and the discussion is, for our profession and industry, is what is the real impact on or threat to the industry, to your employer? Who's going to lead this within the profession to a solution, and solution development, and actually execution and results. So if we have a couple more minutes for a couple of questions, Dennis, what do you have?
Jamie, I got a couple of questions during your presentation, and thank you. There was a boatload of information in there. This question came in when you were reviewing the part about folks that have talked to their boss about succession planning.
Yes.
You talked about 2/3 of the folks say that they have discussed that. And this question came in: what's the best way to start that process? How do you talk to your boss?
Well,
I don't know if you have the answer for that, Jamie, but that was a question that came in.
That's a good question. I will try to give you my view of it. Whether it's the answer, the all-time best answer, I would not suggest that. But I think one answer is you've got to be honest and you've got to say, you know, I need to sit down with you about a very important thing. I'm looking at retiring, you know, going off to fish, whatever it might be, in the next 2, 3, 4 years. I think we need a succession plan, but I'd like you to participate because maybe you're going to be here after I leave. By the way, there's no surety that that's going to happen because turnover in the administrative level is every 4 to 6 years, so they may or may not be around. But at least it's a place to start. You might also go to HR and go to the VP of HR or the senior HR person and say, hey, here's my thinking. I'm a little concerned about approaching my boss, but I need help. Can you help me approach my boss and or help get me on the path to developing a plan?
That's a good suggestion. I like that suggestion. Here's another question that came in, and I think it came in before you talked about where some of the future leaders are going to come from. The question was, where do you think the future supply chain leaders will come from? Internal, academia, or other?
Well, if you look at it this way, we have approximately 5,000 hospitals and, I don't know, 1,500 IDNs around the country, five primary large 500, excuse me, substantial IDNs and other little guys that are a hospital, a clinic, and an ASC. So if you look at that and you look at those within the profession right now, it's a small group to choose from. If you look at other industries, there's thousands and tens of thousands or whatever of supply chain leaders doing it in other industries. And as we look at the skill set, the characteristics, etc., I think we'll find that there are candidates in that group, not solely look at that group, but we'll find candidates in that group who can be successful, like some to many of those that are in the healthcare group right now have experienced.
Jamie, that's great. Jamie, we've run out of time, but boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot of information here. I want to thank you on behalf of SMI for doing this survey and for sharing the specifics with us. I know our members finding value here. I want to remind our members that they will receive an email this afternoon from SMI, just asking them to complete a quick survey. And the feedback is very, very important for us. And let me conclude today's session by again thanking you, Jamie, for your information. I see you've got your contact information up on the screen here. Anybody wants to follow up directly with Jamie, please feel free to do so. If you think of something in the future and you want to connect with Jamie, certainly use myself as a resource, and we'd be happy to connect you with him as well. So again, Jamie, thank you very much for this very educational and thoughtful session. And let me thank all the SMI members for being on today's SMI2U webinar. And with that, we'll adjourn for the day. So thank you all very much. Thanks again, Jamie.
Thank you all very much for allowing me to spend some time with you. Much appreciated. Okay. Thank you, Dennis and team.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
You bet.